This is Professor Stephen Litch in the Principles of Economics. The lecture is continuing financial economics, including talking about diversification of risk and present value. This lecture was recorded in class on November 17th. By doing a recap of some stuff on financial markets. Remember, financial markets exist to help people essentially trade money over time. If I have $1 right now that I don't know what to do with it, and you don't have $1, but you want to purchase $1 worth of stuff, I could say, hey, I'll swap you the $1 that I have right now in exchange for $1.10 next week. And we make that exchange that, we recognize that as loaning and repaying with interest, right? I loan someone $1, a week later they give me $1.10 back. This is the idea of loaning with interest. In financial markets, there are two groups. There are lenders and borrowers. So when households think of themselves as saving money, what are they really doing? Lending money, right? When you go to the bank and you stick your money in a savings account, the bank doesn't really save it for you. It's not like they put it into a safe, secure spot and keep your cash there until you come back for it. As a matter of fact, they don't keep your cash. They give it to someone else. So really, you're giving it to the bank in order for the bank to pass it on to someone else. The same is true when people make decisions about buying stocks or bonds or mutual funds or putting money into a pension plan. All of these things they might refer to as savings or investing, but they are essentially loaning money to others. And so lenders, mostly households, sometimes companies have money that they lend to others. Okay, the borrowers include households and companies, including corporations, and a big borrower is the government. Now, these transactions, these borrowing and saving things, don't typically go directly from the lender to the consumer. In other words, if I have $1,000 I don't know what to do with, I don't go shopping around for someone to loan that to myself. And flip side of that, if I'm trying to borrow money, I don't go asking different people to loan me money so I can buy a car. Instead, people tend to go through banks. I loan my money to the bank, or I give my money to the bank, and then the bank finds a person in need of that money to purchase a car, and the bank loans the money to them. And these people in the middle of the market are called intermediaries. And two important types of intermediaries include banks and mutual funds. And again, it's an intermediary. It doesn't have any, banks and mutual funds don't have any purpose other than to really help the market clear and to have the expertise in identifying, for example, good borrowers. Me, if I'm trying to loan money to someone, I don't really know how to evaluate how credit worthy they are. Are they really going to repay me? Like, what's their income? What's their credit history? How risky are they? I don't know that as an individual person, but the bank specializes in evaluating who is going to be good at repaying a mortgage or a car loan or whatever else. So that's the role that banks play. Mutual funds, as I said, a mutual fund is like a collection of stocks, bonds, and such that is purchased on behalf of a large group. A large group of, and I'll say, lenders. They would probably think of themselves as investors, that they are investing in the stock market or investing in a mutual fund. But the way that it works, more or less, is like, instead of you going out and picking which companies you want to purchase stock in, you give your money to me, and I'm going to use your money to purchase stocks in the 10 best companies that I can find. And so instead of you doing it directly, I do it for you. But I don't do it just for you. I take up like money from 5 or 6 people, put it all together, and then I go out and buy a bunch of these stocks I think are all good. And then my job running the mutual fund is to, on the one hand, collect money from the lenders, and the other hand, purchase the assets, the stocks and bonds that I think are best for that group of people. Many mutual funds, there are thousands of mutual funds that you could purchase. There are a dozen or so major companies that each offer dozens and dozens of different mutual funds with different themes to them in some part. Like, some will specialize in purchasing large companies. Some will specialize in purchasing companies in the tech industry. When I say purchasing, I mean purchasing stock in, which essentially means loaning money to the companies in these areas. But they'll have different, different themes to the mutual funds. As I said, collection of stocks, bonds are another thing. Now, I will remind you all of these 2 important financial markets. One is the market for bonds, one is the market for stocks. Okay, these are things that businesses, that corporations especially, use to get money, ways they use to borrow money. But the reason they do these, they use bonds and stocks, is because in part it's easy to trade them. Okay, a bond is essentially an IOU to a person from the company. Technically, it's a debt and a promise to make payments over a fixed time period. Okay. Whereas a stock is technically ownership of the company, and it entitles the stock owner to a share of the company's profits. And again, these are good ways for businesses to raise money, for corporations to raise money, because they are easy for the bondholders and shareholders to trade, as opposed to the traditional type of partnership or private ownership of a business, where in order to, if you no longer want to participate in business, it's hard to find someone to sell to directly. Shares or stocks in a company are intended to be sold very easily from one person to another without having to go through a private sale. And they're sold in stock markets. Okay, so let's see, bonds, stocks. Now, a concern, well, I guess investors care about two things. One is, of course, the return on their investment or the loan they make. Okay, the return, how much they get back. Okay, but the other thing is risk. And that is the amount of uncertainty in the money they receive. Okay. Now, here, I've mentioned a couple of options for loaning out money. You could loan your money to a bank. You could loan it to a company in the form of a bond. You could loan it to a company by buying stock. Okay. Bonds, two risks associated with purchasing bonds. One is that the company shuts down. And actually, that's true for stocks as well. So if you loan your money to a company and then the next year the company shuts down, you get nothing back. Okay. Now, banks, I'm just going to mention that if a bank shuts down, the amount that you saved in the bank is insured by the government, by the federal government. Okay, so even if your bank shuts down or your bank runs out of money, the federal government promises they're going to cover whatever money you save in the bank. So this means putting your money in the bank has very, very, very low risk. You are almost guaranteed that you're going to get your money back. Okay, now, as I said, bonds and stocks, there's a risk that the company shuts down. Bonds, there's a risk that the company becomes bankrupt. In other words, it just runs out of money. It might stay open, but it has no money left in its bank account to pay anyone and to pay off the debts. And the same is true for stockholders. If the company goes bankrupt, they get nothing. Again, the stockholders, they get a share of the profits. And if there's no money left in the bank account, they get nothing. As a matter of fact, if there's a limited amount of money, bondholders get paid first because that's a promise, as opposed to stockholders who get everything that's left over. Okay, and then the final risk of owning stocks is that there's an uncertain return or uncertain profit. Okay. With bonds, there is certainty that this bond promises it's going to pay off $100 every year for the next 10 years. So that comes with certainty. You have a promise what you're going to get back. Stocks, the company just says, if we turn a profit, we'll give you 10% of it, something like that. And so you don't necessarily know how much you're going to get because you don't know yet how profitable the company will be next year. It depends on a variety of things. Okay, so I mean, if we just compare these, stocks will always be riskier than bonds. Right? A bond has a promise how much they'll pay you, whereas a stock is just like some share of whatever our profits are. Also, bondholders, if there's limited money, bondholders will get money before stockholders. Okay, now banks are the most secure of all of these. So, what encourages investors or lenders to buy stock? It promises a higher return. So in order to purchase stocks with higher risk, they need to promise that at least on average, the lender can expect to get more money. And so I say return here is the highest for stocks and higher than for bonds and higher than banks. That must be true in a market equilibrium. Like, suppose that there were market, stocks are riskier than bonds, but a company was promising that the people who purchase bonds would get the same return on average as the people who purchase stocks. No one would then want to purchase the riskier stocks. Okay, so in order to convince lenders to purchase stocks, the companies must be offering a higher expected return. Okay, and this kind of leads to another important idea, the efficient market hypothesis. Okay, the efficient market hypothesis says that it says that all stocks and bonds have the same average return after adjusting for the risk premium. Okay. In other words, if you are a private person and you're trying to decide whether you should purchase stock in Apple Computer or Amazon or some other company, there is no company that offers you a better return than any other. They all offer the same expected return, like average return, aside from any risk premium. Okay, so startup companies will be riskier than established companies. That means, like, on average, they yield more, but some of them just go entirely bankrupt and you lose everything. But when it comes to, but overall, there are no stocks that are better picks than others, no bonds that are better picks than others. Because if there were, if, for example, Apple Computers is going to be a very profitable company, and purchasing a share of Apple will reliably give you 10% interest per year, or a 10% return per year, while putting money into the bank account would also give you a reliable 2%. No one would ever put money into a bank account. Everyone would purchase Apple stock. Even if there are two choices of stock, Apple, which gives a risk-free 10%, or let's say IBM, which gives a risk-free 5%, that cannot be a market equilibrium. Everyone would want to sell their IBM stock in order to buy Apple stock, right? Because Apple's a good deal. But as they buy Apple stock, it drives up the cost of the Apple stock to the point where it no longer gives a good return. Okay, and while they sell off their IBM stock, the price falls to the point that it becomes a good buy. Okay, but again, there would not be in the market opportunities for people to profit by buying the highest return stocks unless those people have better information than everyone else in the market. Okay, so again, this is called the efficient market hypothesis, and economists talk about like the idea of we joke that you could have just a monkey pick out different stocks for you, or take a dartboard and put a sheet of paper with the names of a bunch of different companies on it and throw darts at it in order to pick out your stocks. And you can perform well, just as well as the average Wall Street financial investor. Turns out this is more or less true, that just picking stocks at random is as successful as having someone pick them for you, or any other strategy of selecting stocks. So, okay, so I've talked about riskiness, I've talked about return. Now, as I said, lenders care about these two things, the return and the riskiness. This idea called the efficient market hypothesis says that if the market is in equilibrium, then there will be the same average return after adjusting for the risk premium. Therefore, when a single person making a savings decision or investing decision, however they think of it, when they are loaning their money to corporations, really the only choice they can make is where they want to be along this risk versus return spectrum. Whether they want to make savings decisions that are low risk and low return, or whether they want to make decisions that are high risk with a higher return. And I'm going to lead into a new topic, which is sources of risk. And just sources of risk, and then the general idea of diversification. Okay, so it turns out that probably the most important decision for most savers is diversification. When they decide how to save their money, they want to diversify, which means spread out what they are doing, do a whole lot of a bunch of different things. Instead of the proverbial putting all your eggs in one basket, you want to spread your money around and save it in different methods. So if we think about it, sources of risk, when you loan out your money to a company, there are some risks that are firm specific. There are some risks that are industry specific. There are some risks that are economy-wide. In other words, like the risk, there are uncertainties. There's an element of luck in determining the profits of any company. And some of those elements of luck are going to be things that impact the whole economy. Some will impact just one sector of the economy, one industry. So when I say industry or sector, I mean a group of companies that do similar work. Or it might impact this one firm. So for example, this past year, the big unexpected thing that happened was the COVID pandemic. And that was a shock that impacted the entire economy, all companies in the economy. Almost all of them were impacted negatively by this. Okay. However, there are some risks that were specific to some industries. So think about like the hardest hit industries were like travel, tourism, restaurants. Those industries got hit the hardest. Okay? Whereas some industries like maybe pharmaceuticals and protective equipment, PPE, it was actually a good year for them. Like all of a sudden people got interested in companies producing vaccines, and some of them will be very profitable this year. And if you happen to own a company that makes mechanical ventilators for hospitals, again, it's a super profitable year. So again, these are like, when I say these are industry-specific shocks or risks or uncertainties, they impact a whole industry. Like we can say like all the companies that do travel were impacted similarly. And then firm-specific, here we get to the differences between companies like Pfizer, Moderna. Okay. They have recently had their own specific, shocks. Okay, things that were not anticipated about productivity. Right? Think of this in terms of maybe if we were to go back a year in time, we could not have anticipated how much the stock of Pfizer would have gone up by now. And why not? What was the thing that we weren't expecting? Of course, we weren't expecting COVID, and we weren't expecting how that would impact pharmaceuticals. But Pfizer specifically is going to be profitable because it's going to have one of the first vaccines on the market. Yeah. And similarly, Moderna, I think, is the second company that has listed its early vaccine results. And by the way, these are fantastic. The people in the public health fields are just overjoyed that there are vaccines that are 90 and 95% effective. That they this is my wife and her colleagues We're like, well, we'll be lucky if we get something that's 60 or 70% effective based on what we know about flu vaccines. And then these first two vaccines hit the market not hit the market, to have preliminary results from large-scale trials are 90 and 95% effective, which is going to be a very, very, very good thing. And even better than what anyone had been anticipating. It's going to result in profits for these companies. And this is something that we could not have anticipated a year ago, that Pfizer and Moderna would become so profitable. And no one ever would have realized, what would happen to Carnival Cruise Lines. Okay, Carnival has not been doing well. Are you all aware of that? Okay. Now, why is Carnival doing poorly?
Weren't they that one cruise that had that surge of cases? Wasn't it Carnival?
Yeah, so wasn't it Carnival that had two of the early cruise ships that were infected and left out at sea because they were full of infected people? Yeah, that's not a good PR opportunity for Carnival. I mean, the travel industry was impacted negatively, but of course Carnival got terrible PR because it had the ships, the Carnival Princess, that was stuck out at sea early in the pandemic, and everyone talking about it. So, there are these things that could not have been anticipated in the past that impact the company's profitabilities. We can kind of classify the different risks as firm-specific, industry-specific, and economy-wide. Now, the idea behind diversification is that if you want to minimize your overall risk, don't put all your money into Carnival or all your money into Moderna, because you don't know what the risks are during the upcoming year. You don't know what's actually going to happen. If you split your money between two different companies, then you stand to do, then you will reduce the uncertainty in your income. So maybe a year ago, everyone anticipated that Moderna Pharmaceutical would pay out 10% profits to its shareholders. And everyone expected the same thing about Carnival Cruises, that they expected it would be 10% on average. But then the way things unfolded, maybe Carnival paid out only 1%, and Moderna paid out 19%. And so, they average out to 10%, but depending on whether you put all your money into Moderna or all your money into Carnival, let me back up a little bit. If you had put all your money into one company or the other, it'd be almost like flipping a coin. Either you get a big profit or you get almost nothing. If you put half your savings into each company, then it's going to average out. So you have the one company that did poorly, but it's offset by another company that did better. And the more companies that you purchase, the more the risks will average out, right? If you, just going from purchasing shares in one firm to purchasing shares in two different firms, you average out the firm-specific risks. Within the pharmaceutical industry, maybe all pharmaceutical companies are doing well this year, but some of the companies competing for the vaccine will get lucky, some of the companies competing to produce a vaccine will not be as lucky. And if you decide that as a lender, instead of purchasing only shares of Eli Lilly, instead of just putting all your money into one company, spread it around all the different companies, then you're sure that you're going to get an average for companies in that industry. Okay, instead of like maybe getting a high performer, maybe getting a low performer. Okay, but then having all your savings in one industry only is going to mean that if that one industry gets hit hard, then you're going to do poorly. So if you put all your savings into pharmaceuticals, then maybe you're lucky that this is the year that pharmaceuticals are really needed and you'll get a lot of profit. But alternatively, it could be the year when Congress passes some legislation that makes pharmaceutical companies less profitable, and then all of your savings or all of the companies that you've loaned money to become less profitable and you lose across the board. So generally, instead of purchasing or about loaning your money to one industry, loaning it to companies all in the same industry, it's better to diversify and loan to companies in different industries. And some of the industries will do well, some will do poorly. The more you can diversify, the lower the overall risk. All of the ups and downs will average out over the different companies. But if you focus your money into one company or into one industry, you increase your overall risk. Okay? So again, the one important thing that individual people can do when deciding how to loan their money or save their money or invest their money, really the one important decision they can make is how to diversify. Okay? And I think if you ask any economist, the economist will simply say the only choice you make when saving your money is how much to diversify. All the stocks, bonds that you might purchase give the same return after adjusting for risk. Okay? So you can make a decision about how much risk you want to take on. But then after that, by diversifying, you can reduce your risk. And so this means that later on in life, when you're picking out the mutual funds that are going to be the source of your retirement savings, what you should do, according to economic conventional wisdom, is select a well-diversified mutual fund. As I said, mutual funds come in all different types, have different strategies in terms of how risky or how high the returns are. Some will focus on purchasing within specific industries, so there might be a mutual fund that invests in the technology industry, and the strategy is to find the top tech firms and purchase shares of those companies. In the conventional wisdom of economists, those focused mutual funds are a bad idea. That they do the opposite of diversification. And unless a person has reason to believe that they understand the technology industry better than other investors, and they have better information about the profitability of tech firms, than other investors, there's no benefit from specializing in or like putting all their money into one industry or another. Okay, got it? Okay, so again, the decisions of the consumer, or some important things. First, this efficient market hypothesis. Okay. There are no stocks that are unusually good picks. There are no bonds that are unusually good picks. They do lie somewhere along a risk reward spectrum. So there are like safe, low return forms of savings. And then there are risky, high return. And an individual person or household can make some decision about their tolerance for risk. Or do they simply want to keep their money fairly safe and get a little bit of a return on it? Or do they want to try to grow it as much as possible, even though that involves taking on risk? They make a decision where they want to be along the spectrum. Okay, but then the second thing to keep in mind is, regardless of the level of risk, diversification reduces risk. Okay? So, that's all you need to know about saving your money later in life. Diversify. And, I guess maybe a third thing I'll add is, if mutual funds, there's an issue of fees. Okay. Mutual funds, again, this is where the mutual fund has a handful of so-called experts on financial markets who select some good stocks and bonds and whatever for people to buy. And then they collect money from a bunch of people, and they go out and purchase those stocks and bonds on behalf of that group of lenders. They charge a fee. All mutual funds charge fees. And the economist who believes in the efficient market hypothesis would say, why? Why are these people asking for salaries? The fund managers will say, well, because we provide so much expertise and we select really good stocks and bonds for people to grow their money. And the economist would say, no, that's simply not true. You could pick at random and do just as well. And the economist would say, since the fund managers provide little value, don't pay for your fund managers. Find the mutual funds with the lowest fees, and that's it. And so the advice is well diversified, low fee mutual funds. Okay. And now I've told you the extremely boring secret of personal finance, like how to do the best with your money. It's very, very boring. There is no special trick. Economists claim there cannot be any trick to doing well with the money. So just keep your fees low and keep your risks diversified. Okay? You'll thank me for this advice later. Alrighty. I'm going to move to another topic in finance. This is the time value of money. Okay. Suppose you were offered with a choice of receiving $100 today or $100 in a year. Okay. And let's forget about inflation. Let's forget about inflation. We're talking real dollars. Which would you rather have, $100 today or $100 in a year? Today. Jack definitely wants it today. Does anyone prefer to have your money in a year? Oh, Hannah wants money in a year. Why?
I don't need it today. I might need it more in a year. If I get it today, I'll probably spend it.
Okay. So you don't need it today. You might need it more in a year. You're worried that if you have it today, you'll be tempted to spend it. Okay. Let's forget about the lack of willpower. Okay. That's irrational behavior. Do you get that? Like economically irrational. But if we think just purely like business decisions. Yes? If you get it today, you can make more money off of it. Jack?
Is that like the whole idea of like having like liquid funds
That-
you can like get out of like something?
The idea of having liquid funds that you can get out of something, I might say that's a different topic. But, I mean, that is really different. Like liquidity does mean something that you can easily convert back into cash. But the topic that I really want to pick up right now is the idea that you can grow it over time. Is that okay? Okay, yeah. Generally, the answer is pretty simple. Today is better than tomorrow. Today's better than in a year. Regardless of when exactly you want to consume it, it's better to get the money today than in a year. So even if you want to consume next year, okay, like Hannah. Sorry, Hannah, but you chimed in with a reasonable but wrong answer. Even if you want to consume it in a year, if you receive today, then you can save and consume. And when I say save, receive interest.
But doesn't interest only matter with inflation?
Doesn't interest matter only with inflation?
Like, doesn't interest that only exist to counter inflation?
No, interest does more than capture inflation. There can be interest, there can be positive real interest, and for the most part there is. Maybe not on bank accounts, but otherwise like loaning your money to bonds or stocks, the interest rate is positive. So here's what you can do. You can receive today, you can save, receive interest, and consume more than $100 next year. Okay, so let me just say interest rate 10% for the sake of this example. Receiving $100 today allows for $100 plus 10% of $100, which comes to $110 of consumption in 1 year. Whereas $100 in a year generates $100 of consumption in a year. Okay, so these two values are not the same. $100 today is equal to $110 in the future, in a year. Okay. So there's a term here that we use. The term is future value. $100 today is equal to $110 in 1 year. So the choice between $100 today or $100 in a year, the answer should be easily that $100 today is better than $100 in a year. $100 today is equivalent to $110 in a year. And $100 today, how much is that worth in 2 years? $110 plus, and then another 10% of 110. So it comes to $121 in 2 years. And then in 3 years, if you were to get $100 today, that would be equivalent to receiving $133.10. Oh, sorry, let me take that back. The equivalent in 3 years of receiving $121 plus 10% of that $121 equals $133.10 in 3 years, and so on. So an economist would say that all of the following have the same value. So today, in 1 year, in 2 years, 3 years, okay, $100 today is equal to $110 in a year. That's equivalent to $121 in 2 years, equivalent to $133.10 in 3 years, 4 years, $146.41. Okay. and so forth. All of these amounts are equivalent. They have the same effective value. They allow you to consume the same amount, like any of these would allow you to consume the same amount. Okay, at any point in time. So, like if you're waiting for, like if you're going to make your big purchase 4 years from now, you don't care whether you're given $100 today or $133.10 in 3 years or $146.41 in 4 years. All of those will allow you the same consumption in year 4 or in year 10 or in year 2. All of these amounts are equivalent. Okay, and so let me define the future value of X dollars in T years at an interest rate of R% is X times 1 plus R over 100 to the power of T. Okay. This is the formula for the future value of X dollars. Okay, so again, like can be talking about how many years and what the interest rate is. Now, something I'd like to point out, going back to this, how the money grows. In the first year, the money increases by $10, right? If you stick your money into savings today and watch it grow, in the first year, it grows by $10. In the second year, it grows by $11, right? From 110 to 121. In the third year, it grows by $12.10. In the fourth year, it grows by $13 and something. Every year, it grows more and more. Why is that? Why does it grow more each year?
The money's bigger.
Because,
Each time you get interest, like you have a bigger sum of money.
okay, each time you get interest, you have a larger value that you're getting interest on. Basically, you start growing interest on the interest payments. Right? You receive interest on the interest payments. Yeah? So like going from today to next year, you get $10 of interest. You have your $100 that you started with, and you get $10 of interest. But then from year 1 to year 2, you get interest on your original $100, but you also get interest on your $10 of interest. Okay, and then going from year 2 to year 3, you get interest on your original $100. You get interest on the $10 of interest you got in the first year, and you get interest on the interest on that money. And then in the next year, you get like interest on your original, as well as interest on your interest, as well as interest on your interest on your interest. And then year after year, it keeps being like you get your interest on your original payment, you get interest on the interest you received on that, and you get interest on the interest you received on that, and the interest, blah, 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 and so on. This has a name. This is compounding. Okay. Compounding interest. And so the growth in the money over time, because of compounding interest, here we have time, here we have money. You start with, X dollars at the beginning of time in year 0. The amount that you own will start to grow like this. Okay. Do you see that curve? Right? In the beginning, it grows slowly, but then the growth rate gets faster and faster. Okay. This is what compounding interest looks like. It is a type of exponential growth. Okay. Exponential growth due to compounding interest. Okay. So, are we good? Okay. By the way, exponential growth is fast. And you're familiar with hearing people say such and such grows exponentially. Almost always, they're misusing the word exponential. Okay? Exponential growth starts off very slow, but then picks up and increases very fast. Now, my wife, I keep talking about my wife, but she's in public health, and she mentions a thought experiment. Okay. Imagine there's a pond. Okay, so here's the pond. Can I color that in? Okay, hey, it's kind of cool. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, there's a pond, and over the course of 30 days, the pond fills up with lily pads. Okay, so lily pads grow, lily pads grow, lily pads grow, grow. Every day, the number of lily pads doubles. Okay, and finally, on day 30, the pond is entirely covered with lily pads. Okay, so again, keeps doubling, day after day, double. On day 30, the entire pond is covered with lily pads. Then the question is that she would ask you to think about is, is the pond half covered? So, yeah, day 29, right? Day 29. So it takes 29 days to cover the pond halfway, and then 1 day to do the remaining covering. I mean, this pond, if we think back, on day 30, it's 100% covered. That means that on day 29, it was 50% covered. on day 28 was 25% covered. Day 27, 12.5% covered. Day 26, it was 6.25% covered. Day 25, what is that? 3.125% covered. Okay, but so by day 25, only 3% of the pond is covered. In the last 5 days, it goes from 3% to 100% covered. And so, do you realize how slow growth seemed to be in the beginning? Like over 35 days, it goes from like the first lily pad to being 3% covered over 25 days, and continuing at the same growth rate between day 25 and 30, it goes from 3% to 100%. Like, this is how exponential growth works. It's slow in the beginning, and then once it gets to an inflection point, it just explodes. Okay, now, of course, she's talking about this in terms of diseases, and right now we're dealing with COVID, and COVID cases seem to double about every 2 weeks. Okay, so here in this example with my pond, it's every day the number of lily pads doubles. COVID cases seem to double about every 2 weeks unless there's intervention of some type. So you realize that when we are at like 3% of the population is infected, that means that we are only 5 generations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations from the entire population being infected. And each of these generations is 2 weeks. So this is what's so scary about the growth of diseases, is by the time it starts to get noticeable, it's very close to exploding. Okay, but there's a flip side to this. That's all her public health stuff. In economics, we talk about money. And supposedly there's a quote from Albert Einstein along the lines of, "The most powerful force in the universe is the force of compounding interest." I should look up whether this is something that he actually said. Okay. Because again, the money initially starts to grow slowly, but picks up pace, and then eventually explodes. Okay, just like the pond with the lily pads. Questions about compounding interest? Compounding interest implies exponential growth. Got it? Okay. I'll do a little side note right here. This is a math trick called the rule of 72. Does anyone know the rule of 72? Has anyone heard of this? Okay. This is a really, really neat trick. If something grows at X% per period, okay, so if your money grows at like 10% per year, the time to double is approximately 72 over X periods. Okay? So if your money is growing at 10% interest, the amount of time that it takes your money to double is approximately 7 years, right? 72 divided by 10. Let's say approximately 7 years. Okay, this is kind of a neat trick. Now, by the way, I think the textbook calls it a rule of 70. And gives exactly the same rule, except says 70 divided by X, whatever. I've never heard anyone other than Greg Mankiw talk about a rule of 70. I've always heard it as the rule of 72. So in other words, if you put your money into a savings account and it gets 6% interest per year, how long will it take your money to double? Everyone do the math? 72 divided by 6 equals 12 years. Okay? If you put your money in a savings account and it gets 2% interest, how long until it doubles? 72 divided by 2 equals 36 years. Okay, so this is just some interesting trivia and like a mathematical trick that's used by people in finance to guess, or to approximate how long until something doubles. I'm going to do the flip side now of future value, and that's the present value. Okay. Suppose someone offers you $100 in a year. Okay. What is it worth today? Okay. Okay. So, sort of the flip side of Hannah's situation. Hannah doesn't want to be offered $100 a day because she wants to consume in a year. Let's suppose that instead it's the situation where a person wants to consume today, but they're being offered money in the future. Or you might be offered a choice between $100 in a year versus X dollars today. What's a fair choice? Okay. Well, this will allow you to consume approximately $91 today. Okay? In other words, what you can do is you're promised $100 in 1 year. Okay. You borrow $91, which allows you to have $91 of consumption today. Okay. And then in 1 year, $91 plus, then you have to repay 10% of $91. This comes to approximately a $100 debt that you can repay with the $100 received. Okay. So, 100, not now, sorry. $100 received, $100 received at the time. Okay, so if you can borrow money, then that $100 in a year is equivalent to $91 of consumption today. It allows $91 of consumption today. Yeah? And the math that I'm doing in order to figure this out, it's like $91 approximately. The math that I did was thinking about how much could I borrow and pay 10% interest on that and end up with $100. And so that value is $100 divided by 1 plus R over 100. In this case, 100 over 1.1, which was approximately equal to $91. Now, I can take this a step further. Suppose that you're promised $100 in 2 years. What is that equivalent to today? In other words, how much consumption today would that allow? And, so to do the math here, the formula that I do is 100 divided by 1 plus R over 100 squared. So, let's see, let me pause for a second. $82.65 is what I could borrow today and repay in 2 years with that $100. So I could purchase $82.65 today. Okay, charge it to my credit card. In 1 year, it'll grow by 10%. So it'll be 82.65 plus 10% of 82.65, so 8.27. So in 1 year, it'll be at 92. $90.92 is what I'll have on my credit card in 1 year. And in 2 years, I'll have that $90.92 plus, and then it'll grow by another 10%. So that'll be 9.09 equals, then add this together, and I get 100.01. Okay, in 2 years. So, there's a little bit of a rounding in how much I borrowed in the first case, this 82.65. So the rounding led to this 1 penny difference, but I hope you get the idea. If I'm promised $100 in 2 years, I can spend $82.65 today. And then this leads to what economists call the present value. Okay. Present value of X dollars in T years at an interest rate of R percent is X dollars divided by 1 plus R over 100 to the power of T. This thing right here, this formula, and this idea of present value, these are super important concepts. Like, I've brought this up a couple of times, that there are a handful of ideas that show up in principles of economics that I think are like truly useful ways of seeing the world. One of them, for example, was sunk costs don't matter. Another is opportunity costs are real costs. A third is marginal thinking. But on that list of top important ideas is present value. $100 in 4 years is not equal to $100 today. They are not equivalent. And we can come up with the equivalent value by this formula. Sometimes we call this discounting. To determine, again, the present value of future money. Okay. And this shows up in some applications. So, for example, sometimes you will encounter in your life a piece of information like, if you take out a $100,000 mortgage at $100,000 mortgage at 5% repaid over 30 years, you end up paying $300,000. Okay, for the house. This statement is false. Do you know how much you end up paying for that house? In present discounted value, these payments, so again, the way a mortgage works is you take out a loan over a long period of time, you slowly pay off the interest and so forth. The present discount value of the mortgage payments is $100,000. Okay, it's spread out over many years, and if you add up the amounts of the payments if you add up the amounts of the payments without discounting them, you might come to a number like $300,000. But that payment that you make, if you make a $1,000 payment 20 years from now, that $1,000 is not equivalent to $1,000 today. It should be discounted. And so again, this type of statement is false. You end up paying in present discounted value, I should say in present value, you pay exactly what you borrow. Okay. So this is just something that you can keep in mind. You will in your life see these kinds of statements. I think they are now required on certain types of consumer loans, that you're told that if you borrow X dollars on your credit card and repay at $100 per month, then you'll end up paying blah, blah, blah over the time it takes to repay the loan. The truth is that math is economically wrong. And in present value, you pay the same amount as you borrow. Okay. Now, this point, let's see, it's 4:10. Am I almost out of time for today? Okay, excellent. Well, that worked well. I'm going to end now. Wait, is there anything else to say? No, present value, super important concept, okay? And keep this in mind that you always need to discount future values to make them comparable to today's dollars.